So to tie-dye your papers, you'll need two things. You'll need the tissue paper from your art kits, and it's okay if it's wrinkled up. You'll need a water cup and a flat brush. So there's two ways you can do this. The first way is if you want color in each individual section, so I'll show you that first. The second way is if you want to tie-dye the entire paper. All right, so first we'll start with the individual sections. So again, pretend I'm done with the Zentangles and I'm ready to add color. You can choose a color scheme. You can use all blues and greens. You can use oranges and reds. I will say that the lighter colors don't show up as much, but they do all work. So I'm going to choose a dark color just so you can see it clearly on the video. So I'm going to choose this green. So let's say I want to make this section right here green. I'm going to rip out a piece that's about the size that I need, and I want to make it a little bit smaller than the shape. All right, so that should work. Then I'm going to take my wet brush. I'm going to hold it down with my hand and then start in the center with these small circle motions until this tissue paper gets attached to my paper and I don't have to hold it down anymore. It definitely takes some practice. The first time you try it, it might feel kind of awkward. Now notice how the pigment is already lifting off the tissue paper and I'm able to paint the rest of the shape with my paintbrush. So I keep adding water to my brush. You don't want it to be totally soaking wet, but you do need quite a bit of water on the paper, which is why I made these have thick paper so that the paper could handle it. So once I have the whole shape filled, it almost looks like watercolor. I'm going to lift up the tissue paper and fill in any white spaces, or keep the white spaces if you like the look of the texture. I'm just going to use the end of my brush to lift up the tissue paper. I'm going to put this, this piece of tissue paper immediately into a trash can so it doesn't stain my table. And before this dries, I can decide, do I like that texture or do I want to smooth it out? I think I'm going to smooth it out. So that's how you get color in just one particular shape. I will show you one more time with this section. Clean my brush off, hold it down with one hand, small circular motions with the other. And it's okay if the colors overlap a little bit. I actually think it looks more like tie-dye when it does that. And once it's stuck, I don't have to hold it down anymore and I can start dragging my color and filling in the shape. And your Zentangle design should show up underneath. And smooth it out. So you can layer colors on top of each other. Some people also take the wet tissue paper and add texture. So it's completely up to you. But that is how I did this side, where I added color to one little section. Right, the other option, and you'll see how the gray paper is a little bit different. The other option is to use big pieces of color and to fill the entire page. So you see how it kind of overlapped this green and this blue? So I'm going to take another color that'll show up nicely on the video. I'm going to use this bright pink color. And with this option, you want to use big pieces. I'm going to overlap the piece with my other colors that I've added so far. Hold it down and start in the center. So same idea. Now the gray paper is a little softer than the white paper, so it does take a little bit more time for the pigment to transfer. Now I'm using a lighter color than I've been demonstrating with, so it might be a little bit harder to see on the video.
But you want to soak the entire piece of tissue paper carefully and then rub it into the paper with your wet brush. okay if it wrinkles up a little bit. So it takes a little bit longer on the gray paper. I'm not sure why, it's just the type of paper, I guess. And this is a lighter color, so I'll need to spend a little bit more time making sure that the pigment is transferring onto the page. Just gonna lift it up and see how we're doing here. Okay, so I'm gonna lift up my piece, and you can see that my
Paper's laid down, and I kind of like the texture, so I'm gonna leave it. So I'm gonna fast forward through finishing this one so that you can see what the possibilities of what this can look like when it's finished. Okay, so after I let it dry for a bit, it's still very wet, so I want to be very careful not to rip my paper. After I let it dry for a bit, I went over a couple spaces and I added another color on top. And I just checked to make sure that it was transferring. Wherever it doesn't, I might set it back down and take my brush and try to spread that around a little bit to fill in those spaces. So there's a certain amount of fixing that you'll have to do, especially with this gray paper. But I don't mind it being a little blotchy like that. So I just kind of slightly lift it up to check and see if it's transferring. If not, I'll leave it on there for a little bit longer. You want to be super careful with your paper when it's wet like this. And that worked out a lot better. So there is my finished tie-dyed paper. Because the whole thing's wet, I want to put it somewhere flat. I might also have to put it under some weight after it dries.